This is a project from a few years ago. It's been outside in the sun and rain ever since, and the top hasn't really held up too well. I did use Titebond 2. I probably should have used Titebond 3. I've got the table upside down on my work table. I'm really happy to say that the base of the table and the legs are in really good shape. So I'll go ahead and remove these wooden clips that are holding the base to the tabletop. Give this base a good sanding, get a few coats of paint on it. And in the meantime, while the coats of paint are drying down here at my mom's house, I'll go back to the shop at my house and make a new top and send these boards through the planer. Okay, I'm back in the shop. I've got the red Grandis for the new tabletop right here. And I've got the Sapili, the old tabletop right here. I'm not ready to build anything with this yet, but I thought it'd still be fun to rip it at the seam, and then we'll throw one of these boards through the planer just to see what the wood looks like. All right, so it's always fun throwing an old board through the planer, and you can see that after just 2 light passes, this board's in great shape. So I'll definitely be able to reuse the wood. For the new top though, I'm using red Grandis, and I'll be joining the boards with dominoes and epoxy. I've got the 4 boards that will make up the top aligned in the order that they'll be joined, and I've marked them with a pencil for the domino. This is the first project that I'll be using the domino on, so I don't have a lot of experience with it other than just a little practice before this project, and I can already see that this is going to become a major player in projects down the road. When I was aligning the boards, I made sure to alternate the grain. So if you look at the end grain of the boards, you'll see one board has the growth rings go down, then the next board goes up, then down, and then up. And by alternating the grain like that, theoretically, the top should remain flat over time. To glue the top together, I'm using Total Boat Thixo, which is a thickened epoxy. And the idea behind that is it should be just less of a mess. This is a mixing tip, and I've put a cut on the front of the tip here, so it's about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to squeeze some of this out to make sure that it's mixed before I put it on the project. I'll put a bead of epoxy on both boards and spread one of the beads out with a putty knife. I want to make sure that every surface is covered, and that way I know I'm getting a good bond. The dominoes I'm using are 6 by 40 millimeter, which measure 3/4 of an inch by 1.5 inches by about 1/4 of an inch thick. So definitely much more of a structural connection than the biscuits that I've used in the past. The wood that I'm using for the new tabletop is red Grandis, and I'm using red Grandis because it's less expensive than Sapili. And I should mention that I'm building the top with 4 5/4 by 8 boards. A 5/4 by 8 board will measure 1 inch by 7¼ inches, so the 4 boards glued together will make a top that's exactly 29 inches wide. Covering the clamps with painter's tape will prevent the epoxy and the tabletop from sticking to the clamps. You can see here when I tighten the clamps that there's an even squeeze out, and that lets me know that every surface is covered with epoxy. I'll use a plastic putty knife to remove the squeeze out from the top of the table before the epoxy sets up. I'll have to scrape and sand the squeeze out at the bottom of the table once the epoxy has cured. This is the first time I used Total Boat Thixo epoxy, and I wasn't sure of the working time, so I worked pretty quickly. Turns out that I had at least a good hour or more before the epoxy started to set up, so that's good to know for next time. After scraping and sanding, I used my homemade crosscut jig to take a little off each end and cut the top to length. This is a really handy jig, and if you want to make one for your shop, I'll have a link to the project video on how I made this one in the description below. The next step is to use a straight bit in the router to cut a drip edge at the bottom of the tabletop. The drip edge will prevent water from running under the table. When the water hits the drip edge, it will simply fall to the ground. Next, I'll use a roundover bit in the router to soften the top and bottom edge. After a little more sanding, I'll apply the finish, and for this project I'm using Total Boat's Danish Teak Sealer. This is a penetrating oil sealer, and I'll apply 2 coats, allowing 24 hours in between coats. Right down, and then we'll center it. After allowing the second coat of finish to dry, I brought the tabletop back down to my mom's house, and my brother Will gave me a hand putting the table back together. So we're going to go flip this way. Wow, it's got some weight to it. You want to get situated? Okay. Good? Nice. Looks good now. Let's see how long it lasts. Okay, well, we have a typical windy spring day here at the Jersey Shore, so I hope you can hear me. I think the tabletop looks good. It's definitely lighter than Sapele, but I think it will darken over time. I don't think the tabletop will fail at the seams because of the dominoes and the epoxy. If it does fail, it will happen along the grain lines, kind of a natural check. And if that happens, I'll try to repair it in place with the epoxy again. If you want to see what the table looks like a few weeks or months from now, follow me on Instagram. I will be posting updates about it. And as always, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.